Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Achieving Readiness Under Uncertainty, Improving Your Speed to Market. My name is Rule Sample. I am the Virtual Training Coordinator for Connects. I'm happy to be here with you today for this first in a series of operational readiness webinars. A few items before we get started. For any technical issues, please call GoToWebinar at 888-646-0014. For any questions throughout the presentations, you can email your Connects group at training@connects.org. In the handouts section on the right side of your screen, you will see a copy of today's presentation, as well as a variety of other handouts. Our speaker will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to ask those questions in the Questions tab on GoToWebinar. If you wish to ask your questions live, please use the raise hand function and we will activate your mic and bring you in on the conversation. Any questions we do not get to, we will send to our presenter. He'll answer those questions and we'll include that as part of our follow-up email. We really look forward to your participation today. And finally, be on the lookout for that follow-up email with all of the slides from today's sessions, a survey to let us know how we are doing, and other valuable information. This is our 2021 calendar. Please keep an eye out for a code in our follow-up email that you can use for significant discounts at all of our trainings and our conferences. Connects is proud to present Laboratory University, June 22nd through June 24th in San Diego, California. This 3-day conference contains 3 amazing events at one location. Create your own event by choosing from over 40 knowledge exchange tutorials. This conference is a hybrid conference, so registrants can attend either in person or online. Please use the code OPS21 to register for this or any of our conferences and receive a substantial discount. Early bird registration ends soon, so please visit our website at connects.org for more information. We have a great partnership with Temple University. We have donated almost $100,000 to their regulatory affairs and quality assurance program. When you attend one of our conferences in 2021, including Laboratory University, you can receive 1.5 credit unit hours towards their RA/QA program by registering for the Temple track. Today's webinar is sponsored by CAI. CAI exists to be the trusted solution for their clients as they strive to build a better working world and improve the human experience. CAI has 600+ global experts that bring top-tier expertise and a focus on operational readiness to every stage of a project, from creating comprehensive detailed project plans to eliminating that last punch list item and beyond into rigorous asset management, reliability, and sustainability activities. With offices in the US, Canada, Ireland, Italy, Switzerland, Netherlands, China, Korea, Singapore, Australia, and Malaysia, CAI can provide local support with global expertise. Philosophically and practically, CAI believes that quality, cost, and schedule can be mutually reinforcing. Trade-offs are not necessary. Shortchanging the focus on quality usually means problems down the road, problems that can cost money and delay time to market. But if quality is built in from the start, then both project delivery and operational efficiency can be achieved with a much higher degree of assurance. When your project requires planned, managed, and documented high quality to exacting global standards, when you need high-performance teams on mission-critical projects, when your project is complex, high visibility, and carries significant risk, CAI can help you meet a higher standard. Please visit their website at www.cagents.com for more information. Thank you, CAI, for joining with us to continue to present the best in virtual training. Our presenter today is Richard Tree, Chief Operating Officer, CAI. As CAI's COO, Rich is responsible for global operations of over 600 engineering professionals. A creative thinker and hands-on senior consultant with 38 years of experience leading operational excellence efforts in both manufacturing and service organizations. He is driven to form and build high-performance teams. He guides customers to develop unified strategies that ultimately improve their organizational management, enterprise agility, human performance, and asset management practices. An experienced Lean Six Sigma subject matter expert, he is personally credited with the lean transformation of 9 manufacturing sites and mentoring over 34 manufacturing sites in advanced lean operations and world-class manufacturing operations. Richard's leadership roles began in the U.S. Navy Submarine Force. He held several key operation leadership roles in 3 manufacturing companies prior to joining CAI. He is currently studying for a Doctor of Engineering at George Washington University, where his research focuses on high reliability organizations. He holds the MBA from Southern Methodist University and the Bachelor of Science degree from Columbia College. Rich, thank you for joining us today as our presenter. I am going to turn over the presenter wand to you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I just double check on the technology. I think you should be able to see me. And do you see the PowerPoint presentation?
We can see you. You're good to go.
Okay, very good. Thank you for the introduction. Thanks everybody for attending this webinar. I'm really excited to be here. There's a lot of information that I'm going to try to cover in a short period of time. The experience that I've got in this area, it does go back quite a ways. I've spent most of my professional career working on how to help organizations be ready when it's time to start up, and I think it's an area that is worth talking about. Hence the reason why we're doing this presentation. So let me begin with just kind of outlining what we're going to be talking about today. The first term, I guess, is that we need to be careful of, or at least cognizant of, is the word uncertainty. Uncertainty is just, in many instances, just another name for risk. And so you can think about how do you develop your risk register, your risk profile as you embark upon your capital project journey, whether it be a full manufacturing facility, new building, new real estate, or whether it be an upgrade to an existing factory. So what I want to talk about is really 5 different areas. The first is, let's align on kind of the journey that a drug goes through. And this is probably repeat information, but the context behind this is important because I want to illustrate some of the research that's gone on in this space to kind of give a perspective on what the investment is and the time. Then we're going to talk about the leadership imperative, because, and what I mean by that in particular is that much of the organization performance is set by the leadership team, and the leadership team has a really critical, important role in kind of focusing everybody's attention. And my position is, and CII's position is, that in the long run, your primary objective in any of these projects is certainly going to be the actual production of the product. And in short-term sense, we tend to get focused on, I think, the wrong things to the extent that it hurts other areas. We'll talk a little bit about, well, we'll talk a lot about the operational readiness and assessment programs, and the fact that it really is mostly just a risk management paradigm. And I'll give you some insight into the ways that you could deploy something at your organization as you're embarking upon any of these types of projects. I'll finish up the conversation on two really important points. The fact that many of the cases of risk that we see in customers at clients is around the areas of procedures, the readiness of their people, and the production and support equipment readiness. And lastly, I'm going to introduce this concept of vertical startup. Whether you've heard of that or not, it's a fairly common term that's used in other industries when it relates to starting up factories. So I'd like to introduce it to those who haven't seen it, and just really kind of focus in on the key elements that go into that. So that's the agenda. So let's just chat for a second about a drug's journey. So Benjamin Blass is a associate professor at Temple, I think it's Temple, and he's also a key advisor to a number of firms. And he did some research, and in 2015 published a book on the basic principles of drug discovery and development. And overall, his conclusion was that the total cost for one marketed drug that makes it to into patients' hands is on the order of $1.75 billion. And that's over a 15-year period from the inception of the idea to the actual production and approval of the drug itself. The challenge here is that with that type of investment, as you're getting towards the end, those different forces start to play a role when you actually embark upon the capital project, the construction project. So keep that in mind as we go through and have this conversation, because I'm going to circle back to this at the end and illustrate the relative impact that operational readiness has on speed to market. So I'd like to take a quick poll. There we go. So based on your experience, your organization places the most importance on, select one of those 5 items, please.
Rich, the results are coming in pretty quickly. All right, so with, okay, so folks are still answering those questions. So with about 80% of the precincts reporting, we have 40% are naming quality culture, 24% are naming project budget, and then plant startup and plant manufacturing process design are all below 20%.
Okay.
And I think we've just got just about everybody who has answered that. So I'm going to close the poll now.
Very good. Thank you. So the results don't surprise me. That's been my experience as well, working with customers, is that certainly there's a high level of focus and importance placed upon establishing the quality culture, and in particular, the quality compliance element of having a quality culture. And there's no wrong answer to approaching it that way. I think that's essential, but I would also say that based on my experience, that even though the emphasis tends to be on that piece, and perhaps you have the same experience as well, when you get right down to it, the operators that are actually operating the facility don't necessarily come to their job with that in their mind. And I think the kind of focus that we need to start to think about is, in order for us to better implement and inculcate this quality mindset, we definitely need to recognize the role of the operators that are actually running the factory in this effort. So So again, not surprised by the poll results. It's kind of where I expected them to be. Thank you for answering those questions, and then we'll go ahead and move on. So I want to give you a kind of a quote, or a quote from Patrick Yang, who is vice chairman of the Resilience organization's board. And some of you may know Pat or have met Pat. I've met him virtually once. He's really considered a legend in the biomanufacturing space. And I pulled a quote from him that was recently on an article. And he says, and I have to agree, we chronically underinvest in manufacturing. Okay, and if you think about the reasons for that, it really, in my sense, it boils down to the fact that the chances of a new drug being eventually approved by the FDA is only about 10 to 15%. Goes back to that timeline that we showed about a drug's journey of all of the ideas that make it through to approval. It's a very, very low percentage. So does it make sense to invest early during clinical trials in being able to manufacture a product that you don't even know is going to be approved? And certainly that is weighing in on the decision making. So it really boils down to from the same article, the farmers tend to view manufacturing as cost centers, as a cost center. You know, biotech doesn't really have the money, and universities don't know how. And in the end, what we create is this readiness problem. Everybody's trying to time it to the right degree, such that the investment in the factory and the investment in the equipment and the investment in the people isn't a wasted investment. And that maybe we need to think about that a little bit differently. And that really is, in my mind, what kind of frames up the readiness problem. And so where I believe we need to take things is to start thinking much deeper on this idea, utilizing a systems thinking methodology. And I'm not going to spend any time on this, but I just wanted to mention the fact that from a systems engineering point of view, a system dynamics point of view, one of the key critical takeaways from systems thinking is that everything is related. So therefore, a focus on quality and quality compliance and a quality culture, that is tightly integrated and tied to every other single function in the organization. And therefore, the focus on one at the expense of the others is a mistake. And therefore, how do we set ourselves up for success that when we actually, I always say, when we go to press the go button, we're ready to start up. In the research that's done by the Construction Institute in Texas at the University of Texas in Austin, 31% of all capital projects start up on time. So literally 70% of all projects are delayed that involve a factory or some form of production, which is a shame. It's actually an atrocious track record because it's such a huge destroyer of wealth, and it delays in our case, it delays getting product to the patients. So this notion of how everything works together and can't function by itself is an important and critical element of how we move forward with this principle of how do we get ready to actually start up. So the leadership imperative is this. The primary objective, I think we can all agree, the primary objective of a factory is to produce something, but to produce something through people. So in order to accomplish that, the tried and kind of tested approach is pretty simple. You establish your objectives at the organizational level. You get the department, you get the work streams levels to figure out what they need to do in order to accomplish the organizational objective. You identify those key results, and then you align the organization around that objective. Now, the projects tend to, when you go into construction, what I've seen over and over again is the projects take a lot of institutional energy and a lot of focus because everybody's focused on where are we at on the budget, where are we at on the schedule, and unfortunately, that becomes the attention grabbing activity. And my contention, our contention, is that the project success actually should be a key result, and that the right objective should be on the operational readiness of the facility, of the department, of the work stream, because in the end, when the project's completed, you still have to be able to demonstrate at least some minimum level of proficiency to start up the factory. So, for those who are familiar with the late W. Edwards Deming, one of the things that he was significantly involved with was the state of management in general in the United States. In addition to the work he did abroad, he has a wonderful quote that I just want to bring up, and that is, "Failure of management to plan for the future and to foresee problems has nurtured waste of manpower, of materials, and of machine time, all of which raise the manufacturer's costs and the price the purchaser must pay." And to this date, that still remains the case. In that, how do we establish the condition to think about the actual case of operational readiness versus, say, just the project? So what is operational readiness? I think it's important that we spend a little bit of time defining that. And the way CAI defines operational readiness is on your screen. Operational readiness is the state of preparedness obtained by an organization when they can safely and efficiently start up, achieve design throughput within the design time frame, and operate the process in control in a sustainable and environmentally friendly manner. That's a bit of a mouthful, but there's a couple of key elements in there that I believe everybody can see the value of pointing it out. In my personal experience, when we've gone to start up factories or projects, what we see routinely is a lot of debugging occur from the time you start up, whether it be you're doing a media fill and you're struggling to do the media fill, and you're just chasing problems as you go, to the indications of a particular upgrade to a piece of equipment just do not follow what was expected, or the control system's not operating properly. Those types of things tend to, well, they don't tend, they do. They stop the organization from achieving the objective of the project. And even though the project may be done, it may be validated, it may be delivered and turned over to the owner, the fact that they're unable to start up the factory is actually probably the biggest area of improvement that we can make with respect to operational readiness. So how do you do it? Well, this is a kind of a notion of what a factory would look like, what an organization would look like from the focus on operational excellence. I think we would all agree that the ideal factory is one that doesn't break down, that doesn't have any quality defects, there's never any safety problems, and you're able to produce your product at the minimal cost. I mean, that's the ideal factory. Oh, and I guess I could add on to that, zero inventory. That would be the perfect factory, right? And there's always some element of waste. There's always some element of unknowns that come into play, and so therefore you'll never quite achieve that. But that ends up being the context or the focus of an operational factory. How do you drive the value stream from beginning to end to the customer? So the path to operational readiness is really built upon a number of dimensions. The first is starting at the bottom of the graphic. The direction's set, the leadership's aligned, the focus is on operational readiness. A key result is the construction program, the project itself, but it isn't the focus. The focus is on how to achieve operational readiness. That with it alone comes with a commitment to investing in people, investing in people earlier than what is traditionally managed on a traditional project, and getting everybody aligned behind the values and the principles that go into establishing a quality culture, understanding quality compliance, getting ownership in the success of the factory. There's many different areas that require focus. I'm going to talk about that in just a second, but as I mentioned to you previously, on average, the three that are chronically, I don't want to say neglected, but pushed to the very last minute is procedure readiness, operator and supervisor readiness, and this is a decision that's made early on in the project life cycle, and that is production equipment readiness. And what I mean by that in particular is, are we investing in the type of production, or excuse me, equipment that is production friendly, easy to use, doesn't have a lot of variability to it that the operator can adjust, is built around this notion of being simple to operate, simple to monitor, simple to observe. Do we spend a lot of time doing that, or do we spend a lot of time buying the equipment that's off the shelf that has a lot of complexity to it? And is there ways that we can work differently to improve production equipment readiness? Of course, that happens at the very beginning of the project, back at the preliminary design stages of the project itself. But there's areas of implementation of the equipment that, as the project goes through its process, the operators would be ideal to be involved with, so that it makes it easier in the end. And it could be just as simple things like layout versus the type of equipment that you buy. But those three areas tend to be the three that you generally miss things on, or there's not enough investment in it early enough to make it successful. The end result is that what I'm identifying here is that in order for us to become operationally ready, we have to start treating these as risks. Once you're operationally ready, then you can focus on operational excellence. And my contention is that operational readiness, operational excellence are two sides of the same coin. Generally, operationally excellent organizations will have a tendency to be operational ready, and vice versa. Now, operational excellence is a continuous improvement activity, and it just is a cycle that occurs between a focus on the value stream and the continuous improvement activity that goes along with that. But to identify the elements of to be ready, to be operationally ready, it simply boils down to this notion of operational risk assessments. And operational risk assessments should drive the creation of risk registers. Risk registers should drive the action plans, schedules, and then identifying the people that are responsible. In the end, operational readiness and an assessment is a program. It should be a program level tool that organizations should deploy and use to improve the chances of success of the objective of being operationally ready, and of which obviously the project plays an important and critical role. So what are the types of risk assessment areas that we have seen in organizations that approach operational risk, operational readiness and their assessment as a program? Manufacturing operations, manufacturing logistics or supply chain, quality compliance regulatory, engineering, EH&S, the production-friendly equipment, facility equipment, maintenance, reliability, cleanability, layout, relationships with outside services, IT systems. All of these go into helping organizations achieve operational readiness. So laboratory operations, people qualification and training programs, even finance and accounting, security systems, standard operating procedures, organizational policies, technology transfer. For the tech transfer MS&T experts in the audience, if there are any, you know that your tech transfer guidance is very focused on this principle of operational readiness. And certainly the focus from that context is, again, are you able to deliver the drug as it's in, or the product as it's intended to be delivered? So I'll continue to reiterate, these are the three areas that we find to be areas that lack attention in general. So let's jump into the second poll.
And folks, once again, that poll is on your screen, and go ahead and select the answer that best suits you. And those are coming in pretty quickly, Rich.
Okay. Yeah, this will help me get a gauge of just, again, does it match with the average that I've seen in the different projects I've been involved with, or you know, how can we inform ourselves moving forward on this presentation?
We'll leave it up for a couple more seconds before we start reporting the results. But it looks like it is definitely trending in one big direction. We're at 62% FMEA, 26% process risk assessment, 9% other, 2% none, and 0% HAZOP analysis.
Okay. All right, thanks. I think you can close the poll. That gives us the numbers we need. All right, so let's talk about this for a minute before I jump into an example of what's sometimes referred to as a risk cube, depending on your experience, or and then I'll talk about a risk register. What you see on the screen today, right now, is what's called a risk cube in many circles. The notion of risk. So imagine for a moment if an organization had a focus on operational readiness. The way that I would set up this function within my project, I would create a team that was responsible for operational readiness. And that team, you can almost think of that team as residing in, or having a central location or a war room of sorts, where the first step would be to kind of establish the charter of what the purpose of the team was, and then the second step, for all intents and purposes, to go forth and do risk assessments on every one of those dimensions that I had presented previously on the last slide before the poll. And the output of those risk assessments would be collected in the risk register. And the risk register would be the master list of items that the organization would need to track at a program level to ensure that when the time came for operating the factory, they were ready. And so there's a number of different ways to do risk assessments. And this is just an example I pulled from some different types of projects I've done. I've done projects where we've focused on very specific criteria for batch release and when we would have to do a recall and so forth, to identify some of the risk severity factors, and then of course the likelihood of the activity occurring. The one area that sounds like everybody has familiarity with is in the FMEA. Many of the FMEAs generally have a third dimension, which is on detectability. And in most cases, that would not play a role in these types of risk assessments to drive operational readiness. So I've limited the risk cube to a two-dimensional risk cube based on severity and likelihood, which tends to be a fairly common activity when it comes to risk management from an organizational level. And I've thrown up some other ideas for consequences, whether it be people, environment, whether it's the asset itself or the reputation of the organization. You'll use this in business continuity assessments and so forth. But the idea here is to have a consistent way in which you identify the nature of the risk and what what you're going to do to either assume the risk or mitigate or avoid the risk, or if you actually need to redesign something to prevent that risk from happening. But again, the common theme is that you have a well-defined approach to scoring and quantifying the nature of the risk to allow the organization to focus on the key things that will drive action or activity. So so that's an example of risk cube. And of course, here's the risk register. Again, looks very similar to kind of the templates that you've used for FMEAs. Maybe a little bit of a modification. It's slightly simpler than what's in an FMEA, but the same activities or the same kind of key elements hold. Get the risk description, the impact of the description of the impact, what the impact level would be, what the probability level would be, and then the priority level. And of course, the high priority items, the ones in red, those are the ones that you're going to avoid in some way, shape, or form. And in this case, in the example I give, I'll give you a realistic example is that procedures need to be written and reviewed. Procedures represent the conduit that operators need to have to be able to be successful at what they're doing. Most operators come to the job, well, I shouldn't say most, a lot of operators come to the job with zero experience whatsoever in pharmaceutical manufacturing. And it's obviously highly dependent upon where the factory is located at and what your local workforce is and what type of investment you're going to make in relocating people as appropriate. So procedures are critical, and procedures oftentimes are constructed on the fly and lack robustness and lack clarity or are complicated to use. So in this example, I used a theoretical or a hypothetical rather impact level of 5 and a probability level of 5. And because the probability being 5 being the fact that maybe organizations don't have enough people to write procedures at that time. And so so it represents a high risk item. So you get the point. But then what this does is this risk register forms the primary mechanism by which your operational readiness team will be able to drive the organization to that type of readiness state prior to the startup of the factory. So let's talk about some of the examples of equipment focus. So I've mentioned before that production equipment tends to be an example where in the life cycle of the equipment, things become painful over time that are not so obvious at the beginning of the project. I'll give you an example of one innovation that's occurred over the last probably 5 years of diaphragm valves. So we all know elastomers represent a large effort underway in most factories to manage and replace, and the activity of actually breaking into the boundary of a system and putting it back together again often causes or creates additional problems for a period of time. So this is an example of an ITT valve where some brilliant engineer came up with the idea of, well, let's remove the fasteners from the process. Let's utilize a system where it just evolves on a 90-degree turn and some capture devices to, one, provide the right amount of torque and make the elastomer replacement that much easier. This is an example of a pharmaceutical grade application valve, and sure enough, these types of valves, when they're deployed, super easy to use, super easy to maintain. Literally drops the time to do maintenance probably by a minimum of 50%. And also the likelihood of follow-on problems after the maintenance is done, very, very far removed, very remote. So point being is that that this type of thought process that goes into the design is probably not necessarily on everybody's radar screen at the early design phases. But at that time, the design that's being done is how do we create the process that produces the material or the drug, and maybe how something's operated or where it's located at, or kind of what environments it is in, is a second thought or an afterthought. and that's an area where equipment focus can become important. Other simple area is, I gave you an example of a differential pressure gauge. Making it easier for the operator by putting colored scales on there for allowed operating ranges if it's a mechanical gauge, or some other indicator that might make it easier to, at a glance, see when something's not right, is definitely an area of improvement. I think the industry as a whole could probably focus on a little bit more than they do now. A lot of the stuff going via automation, that tends to be built into the automation interface, but I'm talking to some of the mechanical pieces and instruments more than that. So equipment focus, operability, maintainability, cleanability. Is it failure proof or resistance? If you've heard the term poka-yoke, it's a Japanese term that basically means foolproof. How do you build equipment that is foolproof so that the operator doesn't have to spend a lot of time making adjustments to get it just right? Because we all know that the bane of most manufacturing is variability, and so how do we remove variability? We fail-proof or foolproof equipment operations, and then visual management, which is the piece that I was just talking about with the gauge. On the people side of things, operator and supervisor focus. From an operator side, there's prerequisites: job descriptions, clear duties and responsibilities. I just recently completed an engagement where the job descriptions and the duties and responsibilities of operators were not well known, and so everybody was just kind of doing their thing, and they didn't have clear distinctions on what they were responsible for. It happens in the hustle and bustle of day to day. Those types of things do happen, and it's mitigated by having this operational risk or operational readiness and assessment team. Qualifications, training, demonstrated hands-on knowledge, testing and examination, basic maintenance and proficiency. My experience with training programs in pharmaceutical industry is that they're another area that's chronically underinvested in, and it's too easy. It literally, in my view, is too easy. Sitting down, doing read and understands, and then taking quizzes online that are not challenging and don't require real thought, sets organizations up for failure at some point. On the flip side, on the supervisory side, I have found that supervisors need 5 things in order to be successful supervisors. The first is that they need a knowledge of their job requirements. And there's a distinction between knowledge and skilled as I'm using it in this example. Knowledge of job requirements and knowledge of the work being done does not mean that they have to be subject matter experts of the work being done. Okay? Does not mean that they have to have memorized the job requirements. They have to be knowledgeable of them. Supervisors basically kind of have to have that innate built-in BS flag, as Ernest Hemingway used to say. But they need to be skilled at instructing their team. They need to be skilled in improving processes, and they need to be skilled at leading. And I don't think we put enough emphasis on the supervisory elements and the critical role that they play in the successful operation of a factory. So I present to you this notion of the 6 disciplines of operation. It basically boils down to 6 different pillars. From an organizational foundational point of view, organizations are built on value. They have a purpose, and those values drive the way that the organization believes that they should behave. And in order for operating teams to be operationally ready, there's basically, similar to a quality culture, an operational culture is going to implement and kind of drive into the organization, into the team, 6 things. 1, having a questioning attitude. 2, an appreciation and a respect for level of knowledge. 3, what I call forceful watch team backup. 4th, formality, just being formal in the day-to-day operation. Fifth, procedural compliance, and sixth, integrity. Now, how does that work together? So I built this graphic to kind of help explain this a little bit. So think of an operator going to a factory floor during operations, but also think of the operator that is getting ready to start up. An operator that has integrity creates the drive to improve their level of knowledge. If they have respectful level of knowledge and they have integrity, that is going to be kind of a circular dynamic that's going to grow that individual's level of knowledge. Level of knowledge, an improved level of knowledge then allows that operator to see what somebody else is doing and knowing whether they're doing something wrong or they're going to get in trouble or they're going to make a mistake, and then let that operator, that other operator, know what's going on. That is the concept of forceful watch team backup. The idea of forceful watch team backup is not just from one operator to the next. It could be from an operator to a supervisor. Okay, so, and I'm not going to continue to go down this path. You can look at this at your leisure. But this is a perfect example of that systems thinking idea I presented at the beginning of the presentation, that everything is interconnected. You can't just be a procedurally compliant organization and not have formality and not have a questioning attitude, not be focused on improving level of knowledge and so forth. Operational discipline is a critical element of operational readiness, and frankly, I've not heard the term operational discipline used in any engagement I've been a part of in my experience. And lastly, procedures and policies, probably self-evident. I've talked a little bit about procedures already. It's intended for a qualified performer to follow. It's not necessarily the case that somebody who's not qualified is going to be able to pick up a procedure and understand it. Okay, so that's a prerequisite. That's really important to understand. That tells you that the training program to qualify operators has to be, again, it's a very tight overlapping relationship with the procedure, and so therefore procedures got to be in place with a high degree of integrity at the time that the training program is launching as well. Clear and concise, easy to follow. I've seen a lot of procedures, and you may have experienced this as well, where if you expect an operator to be doing an evolution and have the procedure open, and what ends up happening is that they focus too much on going to another procedure, another procedure, another procedure, and they get lost in the interplay of references. And of course, policies, guidelines for working standards, clarifies level of authority and how to escalate problems. These three things primarily drive a lot of the variance that we see in organizational, operational postures. Lastly, I want to cover this concept of vertical startup. Vertical startup is the prime objective. It's the key result of being operationally ready. If you're able to start up as designed in the design time frame up to the demand that you have to go to, if your objective is, if your design throughput is, say, I don't know, 10 batches a month, then you should be able to start up, achieve your throughput requirement to achieve 10 batches a month from the very first startup. That is the fundamental objective of being operationally ready. Okay. Instead, what we tend to see is the graph I have in orange, which is not operationally ready, where you have these kind of fits and starts to achieving or getting up to that level that you hope, or maybe you never get there and it's always a constant struggle. So the detail behind that is when problems are identified. If the normal approach from our experience is that companies that start up tend to focus or start up with problems such as this, what's displayed on the graph here, tend to focus on construction rather than operator and supervisor readiness, procedural readiness, and identifying problems early in the process. I once worked for a very large manufacturer that utilized a methodology called world-class manufacturing. And one of the key performance indicators that they had from the very beginning of the project is they tracked how many problems they identified in the early stages and how many problems they mitigated as the project occurred or went from beginning to end. Those problems identified were all focused on what could make the equipment harder to operate. And so, and they would measure in the hundreds of problems. It wasn't one or two problems here and there. It was hundreds of problems, down to things as benign as where an outlet was located. Because if the outlet was in the wrong spot and it made it harder for the operator to plug in a device to do their job, then that was a problem. And it was a very effective in a meaningful program to establishing operational readiness. But this is an example where problems are found as the startup occurs. And it's unfortunate because this becomes very frustrating, particularly if the site head is like, come on, we got to get started up. We're done with the project. What's taking so long? What's the problem? And this ends up being a drag on morale, and it ends up being a problem in not being able to meet the objectives on speed to market. The right way, theoretically, as I described, is rare, is problem identification early. How can you identify, and what mechanism do you have in place to find problems? The solution is teams. The solution is people. If you don't have the people on your staff and you're bare bones as much as possible because you're focused on the investment in the construction project, this type of startup is rare. It's unfortunate, but that tends to be reality. Somehow we've got to be provocative enough to change the way that we think about this. And why? Because in the end, the investment into operational readiness fundamentally becomes a rounding error when you talk about putting a drug on the marketplace. And so that being said, that is the conclusion of my presentation, and I'll take questions at this point. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Rich. As Rich said, we are in the question and answer period of our presentation. So if you would like to ask a question, go ahead and put it in the questions box, or go ahead and raise your hand and we will bring you in live. Got one comment from one of our attendees. He says that even the automation solutions require more forethought toward operations and operators than is common. For example, alarm management priority with action clarity. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I totally agree. Again, it's the interface. It's the interface between operability and ease of operations and visual management, human-machine interface that tends to be thought of after the fact, not on the front end as much as it should. Totally agree. It's been my experience as well.
As we are waiting for questions to come in, your comment about bringing in people. So what you're saying, it is worth the time and quite honestly the expense to bring in teams of people before the projects start, before things get started, to address the problems, because even after the teams are formatted and they have talked about all the problems and tried to solve all the problems are still going to arise, but at least they're in the process of doing that. Is that a good, fair assessment?
That is a fair assessment. In fact, there's smart ways of doing that too. You don't have to invest in the entire operator contingency early on in the project, but it might make sense to bring in your supervisors. It might make sense to bring in some of the more experienced operators or maintenance engineers that are going to form the end team, because if you are able to bring them in early and they understand the ins and outs of the construction program from the beginning, they are then able to go on and do more effective training and mentoring and coaching of the new operators that come on later. They also serve that in that capacity of being able to identify from an operator's point of view what's not going to work or what will work on the existing design that the design firm may come forward with.
Question, what have you found is the biggest challenge in convincing organizations that they need to focus on operational readiness?
Um, I don't want this to, I'll be a little bit provocative on this, probably intentionally. The biggest challenge, the biggest challenge is financing. The finance team tends to be the biggest challenge on that, of course, because they're constrained with the expectations that might be set by investors, or that might be set by other other sources where the money comes from, to really minimize costs. And that is the intent of this presentation, is to highlight this issue, and in order for us to change the industry and the thought process, we need to recognize that the return on investment is tangible. And so how is it that we can maintain that focus? But my experience has been very often the case that there's just not enough money set aside in the budget to staff the factory at the end.
You mentioned a book, Basic Principles of Drug Discovery and Development by Benjamin E. Blass. Where can they get it from? And he also wants to know if we can get it at a discount for attending this webinar. We'll address that a little bit, but where can they get that book, Rich?
That's available on Amazon. It's like I said, it was published in 2015. I think it's gone through a couple of different revisions, either before 2015 or after, but it's available on Amazon.
We will include the link to that book in our follow-up email to you. Another question, in lean operations, for example, CMOs, getting qualified operators, product manager and director, involved in projects early to mid-life cycle can be a challenge. How can project managers convince site heads and leadership to commit these vital resources to projects and potentially hurt operations resources?
Well, it's a great question, and the answer to that is you got to have data. And the data is, I alluded to a KPI that this organization that I was working for used, which was the number of problems identified and mitigated. They evaluated their success on the quantity of legitimate problems identified. And so I think from a project manager's point of view, the focus needs to be on the kind of the holistic economics of it. If I can identify, sorry to kind of go down another quick rabbit hole. If you haven't been introduced to the concept, but the average cost of correcting a problem after mechanical completion is about 15 to 20 times the cost of fixing the problem early on in the project. All you need is one piece of equipment to fail of any substantial magnitude to do its job that needs to be redesigned to justify the expense of bringing in somebody early who would have a high probability of identifying that problem as an operator, as an experienced operator. Mind you, I said bring in experienced people early, in my mind, to justify the expense. The case that needs to be established has to be built on data. There's plenty of data out there to suggest that early project life cycle corrections are key to overall project success in the long run.
We have a comment and then a question. Another challenge to ops readiness, the tendency to focus purely on speed to construction and validation completion tends to trump the operability priorities.
I think that those are not mutually exclusive, actually. I think speed to construction, mechanically complete, and validation. And if I'm understanding the comment correctly, yes, I can see that. And I certainly would make that a priority as well if it was my project. But that speed does not have to, we don't have to slow that down by bringing on operators or staffing people up early to drive that operational readiness component. Again, I think the mechanism becomes the risk register. I think there's something very tangible about risk registers that if you put a risk register down on the site head's desk and say, here's all the things that places at risk of when the project's complete, starting up the project, I believe that you're going to get a lot of eyes opening up on that, just on that step alone, and supporting some of the initiatives on operational readiness. But I agree that the speed of those activities tend to drown out the need to become operationally ready for sure.
We've got two more questions as we are starting to wrap up here today. The first one is, have you experienced or seen where the operational readiness team work with the operational or the OpEx team? In other words, identify the KPIs early rather than months later after startup. Have you experienced or seen that?
Yeah, but not in the pharmaceutical industry. I've seen that in the energy industry, and that happens routinely. But again, they've evolved over the years to approach that as a necessary function of being ready. I mean, we have a similar tool in place, right? When it comes to the PAIs and the various FDA inspections that basically come in and confirm that you're ready to go. That's a formative event, and in my mind, it's something that we can leverage. I was going to add some of that into this presentation, but I just didn't have the time for it. But yes, to answer the question, yes, I've seen it, not in the pharmaceutical industry, but in the energy industry, and the one other place I've seen it is in the personal care products industry.
So, Rich, this is actually the kickoff on this whole operational readiness series of webinars. So these questions that folks are asking might just very well be addressed in other webinars that are coming up. So there are great questions that are coming in. Last question of the day: how are external providers like contractors, machine suppliers, etc., how are they included into this process, and are they included in this process?
Terrific question. So the answer to that is yes, by all means. That if when you get a chance to take a look back at the slide, that was one of the risk items that I identified in the operational readiness piece. Who are your outside service providers or your outside suppliers in the supply chain that can become critical partners with you to drive or at least do their part in establishing operational excellence? The organizations that recognize the suppliers and the contractors and service providers as a partner in this delivery are the ones that tend to be more successful when it comes to operational readiness. There's a methodology that you may or may not have seen in your experience, and that's called integrated project delivery. That term is very specific to that notion of bringing all of the parties together as a team. It's an element that I think is from an old construction methodology is night and day above the old way of doing things. So super critical to the project success, in my opinion, as well as becoming operationally ready.
As we wrap up today, Rich, final thoughts.
I think the final thought is this: that in order for our industry to really take advantage of being ready to go, I mean, take for example the COVID-19 pandemic and the therapies, the drugs, the products that were being produced to combat that. The first thought that went through my mind was, how are we going to produce fast enough to get the supply chain primed with the vaccinations once they hit the market. And here we are, almost in May, about 6 months after the first emergency use approval occurred, and we're still not where we should be. So to avoid that in the future, we really have to change our mindset. The traditional approach to becoming operationally ready needs to evolve.
I think that's a great way to end it. So, Rich, can't tell you how thankful I am that that you were here today. I think this is a great kickoff to a whole series of operational readiness, and thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Our next webinar in this series will be on May 20th, so please visit our website at connex.org for more information. I am going to launch a very quick poll that I ask that you do this before you check out today. Please rate this presentation on a scale of 1 to 5 on its value to you and your organization. Your individual responses are kept anonymous, but your feedback helps us continually to improve our presentations. As you're doing this, please look for a larger survey in our follow-up email that will be coming out to you very shortly. But we ask that you just take this quick poll so that we can get a good read on what has happened today. Any questions that we did not get to or that you're asking a little bit later, we will make sure that we forward to Rich and he will fill out those questions for us and we'll send that out. So it looks like just about everyone has filled out that poll. I do appreciate your feedback in this as we continue to improve the training that we bring to you. So thank you very, very much. Today's webinar was sponsored by CAI. Our expertise covers complex project management, no-code technology, commissioning compliance, training, operational workflows, and more. When you need a higher standard, CAI is your partner of choice. Please visit their website at www.cagents.com for more information. And please do check out Laboratory University in June of 2021. Use the code OPS21 to register for this or any of our conferences and receive a substantial discount. Early bird registration does end soon, so please visit our website at connex.org for more information. Rich, once again, thank you for a great presentation today. It was a great kickoff to our series on operational readiness. On behalf of Rich Tree and the entire staff of Connex, I am Rule Sample. Thank you for attending today, and I look forward to seeing you at our upcoming conferences. Have a good day, everyone.